President Trump has been here in New York all week on business at the UN, but he returns to Washington later today to face a historic political fight. The president told reporters he'd consider releasing records of all contacts between his administration and Ukraine to prove he's done nothing wrong. Paula Reid was at Mr. Trump's news conference yesterday. Paula, I'm really curious, has the president's story changed since we've seen this memorandum of the call with the president of Ukraine?
Well, the president would not directly answer questions about whether his call with the Ukrainian president was appropriate. And for someone who usually relishes the opportunity to spar with the press, he took just 4 questions before making an abrupt exit.
I didn't do it. You take a look at that call. It was perfect.
President Trump defended his conversation with the president of Ukraine and issued a new call for transparency.
I fully support transparency on the so-called whistleblower information.
But in a meandering press conference, he deflected when pressed if it was okay for an American president to ask a foreign leader to investigate a political rival.
Democrats did this hoax during the United Nations week. It was perfect.
But throughout a busy week at the UN, the president took every opportunity to spread unsubstantiated claims and attack his political enemies.
Joe Biden and his son are corrupt. It's the worst witch hunt in political history.
During their meeting Wednesday, the Ukrainian president came to Mr. Trump's defense.
Nobody pushed me, yes.
In other words, no pressure.
But Democrats argued the power imbalance was implicit. According to a summary of the call, after the Ukrainian leader brought up U.S. defense spending, Mr. Trump told him, "I would like you to do us a favor." He asked his counterpart to find out what happened with CrowdStrike, the company hired to investigate the Russian hacking of the DNC servers. He also asked the Ukrainian leader to look into former Vice President Joe Biden and his son.
If you're a Democrat, you have automatic protection.
No evidence has yet emerged that former Vice President Joe Biden or his son Hunter did anything illegal.
It's such a blatant abuse of power.
Last night, Biden made his strongest comments yet on impeachment.
It seems to me it's awful hard to avoid the conclusion that it is an impeachable offense and a violation of constitutional responsibility.
President Trump has repeatedly pointed to Biden's efforts to push out a Ukrainian prosecutor, even describing the man, Viktor Shokin, as very fair and very good. However, experts tell CBS News Shokin was known internationally as very troubled and deeply corrupt. Biden insists his efforts were to root out corruption, not to defend it.
Paula, looking at the clock here, we're less than 2 hours away from the House focusing in on this complaint. What do we know at this hour about the whistleblower, and how did it get to McGuire?
We know the whistleblower is really concerned about retaliation, which is why he went to the Inspector General, went through these channels. We also know that the government has found this is someone who supported the president's political rival in the last election, but the Inspector General still found this complaint credible. Now, the whistleblower heard this information secondhand. This person was not on this call. It heard from other White House officials that the president had apparently applied pressure on a foreign leader. The whistleblower was concerned, brought this to the Inspector General. The Inspector General was concerned this could have been a campaign finance violation. So they took all of this to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. They looked at this complaint and they said, okay, clearly we have issues of privilege, we have issues of confidential information. We need to go to the White House. We need to go to the Justice Department.
Paula, the Attorney General was also mentioned in this call, Paula.
Yes, he was.
How exactly is the Attorney General's Office, Justice Department implicated in this, if at all?
There's a lot of big questions about that right now because the president mentions Barr in the call, but Barr issued a statement denying very narrowly and very specifically that the president ever asked him to have the Ukraine investigate Biden or have him reach out to the Ukraine. But the question is, have you ever discussed this with the Attorney General? And we know the Attorney General had a question on the Hill several weeks ago where he was asked, has the president ever asked you to investigate anyone? He couldn't answer. He said he didn't know. So he can't answer the question. Yesterday, the president only took 4 questions, so I didn't have a chance to ask him. But there are questions about whether the president has discussed this or used U.S. law enforcement as well.
For a president who likes to jab people for being low energy, he seemed very subdued, very low energy yesterday. I'm curious what your thoughts were as someone who was in the room. And then Democrats read this report and say it's damning. Republicans read it and say, oh, really nothing to see here. I think that's what frustrates people, the two extremes. How do you explain his low energy, his mood yesterday?
It was surprising. Look, we're all tired after this week, right?
Yeah.
But it was surprising that he had an opportunity to really take some of these tough questions and spar, which we know he loves to do, get out there, defend himself. And he didn't really do that. He talked, it went on for a little over an hour. He talked for most of that time. He only took 4 questions. He even tried to insist that we ask him only about things that happened at the UN. Now, guys, the president took every opportunity at the UN to forward these allegations. A very unusual press conference. He even paused at one point to defer to Pompeo. Not quite clear why he was so tired, but not his usual self.
It's very interesting. Thank you, Paula.